to some of our recording in progress. Thank you. Before we dive into some of our local data, but I wanted to take a moment, and if I can find her, I'm going to spotlight her. Spotlight for everybody. I'm going to welcome Barbara Bejour. So we are thrilled that Barbara joined our team the end of January. Barbara was raised in Norwalk as a graduate of the Norwalk school system, is raising her son here. And some of you may be familiar with her as she also served as a community advocate before applying for our operations coordinator position. And so she's been doing a lot of behind the scenes work in our Salesforce platform and several projects that are helping kind of keep us on track and organized with our work. So we are really so excited to have Barbara with us, and she's just a bright light and breath of fresh air, and we are so happy to have her. So Barbara will be managing the info at Norwalk ACTS account and some other things. So if you need anything, please reach out to Barbara. So welcome to Barbara. Transitioning over to let you know that to highlight something that went out in our newsletter last week, that we are recruiting for our board of directors. If you recall, we switched our annual meeting, which had been in December, to June to align with our fiscal year. And so we also took that opportunity to match it up with when our board turns over. And, you know, just a refresher, or if you're new to Norwalk ACTS, when we became our own 501c3 in 2018, 19, we had a formal board of directors, of course, because we're 501c3. So there's duties and responsibilities of a board for a nonprofit, including, you know, fiduciary oversight and whatnot. So we have openings on our board, and we would love any of you who are interested in serving on that to look at the kind of list of things that we are looking for, and invite you to have a conversation with me. You know, even if there's things on that list where you say, oh, I'm not sure that that fits my skill set or what I'm interested in, but you're kind of on the fence, please give me a call so we can have a conversation. Some of the most important criteria is really just a belief in what we are doing, the belief in collective impact, the belief that these large issues that we're trying to solve can only really be solved when we come together and work collaboratively to kind of move the needle on multiple outcomes at the same time. We've spent a lot of time in our backbone team and the governance committee and the board of also talking about power dynamics and power shifts. And I think traditional board members have been those with kind of the institutional power that can leverage systems that have you know, philanthropy, others in positional power, but we really are also looking for people who have credibility within the communities and the communities that we are serving and care about. So if you're a community member who is connected with others in the community and think this might be a good role for you.
My whole family's got this shit anyway.
I'm gonna mute
genetics tied to it.
Michael. I can't get on the mute button. So please reach out and let's have a conversation. So I'm going to turn it over. Actually, before I do that, I just want to mention and remind everyone that our last convening focused on policy. And I know many of you were there, and we had a great presentation by the School and State Finance Project and kind of learning how to testify and share your story. So we are in the thick of the legislative session. If you haven't noticed, Norwalk ACTS is sending some increased number of emails because we really want to flag proposed legislation that we think we know that you all care about and that our data says we need to put some attention to. So we really encourage you to keep up with it on your own as well. Brandon, our policy director, will put his email in the chat if you have questions. There is more proposed legislation that we can keep up with and more issues that we care about than we can possibly manage, you know, from housing and healthcare, education, mental health. So there are some things, given our bandwidth, that we kind of jump in and try to help with, but we really rely on our members, all of you, to stay involved. I testify personally on issues that I care about and I follow, so we encourage all of you to be doing the same thing and reaching out to your elected officials through this legislative session. So that's my little policy plug, and I'm going to turn it over now to Jesse to walk us through kind of the rest of the opening and agenda.
Hi, so I wanted to first just kind of announce that we released our Evergreen last week. So this is, an Evergreen is like, it's an 8-page document that explains our theory of action and how we operate as a collective impact group. So it explains, we acknowledge that this work is really complex and that Norwalk Act, it means to different people. So this is explain how we rate our values and what do we mean by cornerstones, what do we mean by initiatives. And so I'll drop it in the chat shortly, but just want to encourage you all to take a look at it. And
Yes, your audio is breaking up.
can you hear me all right now? Or...
It's okay. Maybe better to go off camera for a minute.
Okay. All right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so the second thing I wanted to announce was that we are celebrating the release of our Norwalk out of school time program locator that just got launched last week. So we'll also drop this in the chat, but this actually features over 50 programs across Norwalk. And traditionally this portal was just showing summer programs. We are now showing after and summer school programs that exist all year round. And families can search for programs by age, price, type, time, and day. This program locator is available both in Spanish and Haitian Creole and can be accessed by desktop and mobile. And so we'll drop some flyers in the chat as well as the link, but we want to just give a quick shout out to our data analyst, Ray, for putting this together. It's really well done, simple to use, and just a big ask to everyone here as our membership that we really are relying on you to help us get the word out. If you work in Norwalk with families, please just share this resource. There's plenty of flyers to share. If you live in Norwalk and are a community member, please just share with your your network and your neighbors. The more people that know about this and the word gets around, the better it'll be. So just a big ask to please help spread the word about this resource. It's completely free for both, families and any program. If you're not featured on it, can submit your program information and we can get you on the program locator. So lastly, we have each one of our convenings focused on a particular cornerstone. So our 4 cornerstones are data, social justice and racial equity, policy and advocacy, and community engagement. And they show up in our Norwalk ACTS ecosystem through our initiatives. So we have 4 initiatives that span the cradle to career continuum. And the way that we as a backbone team support these initiatives is through these cornerstones. And I like to think of them as they're interwoven with each other. So while they are in separate corners, they're really kind of embedded on top of each other and within each other. And so when we'll talk about data today, data is so interconnected to our equity work, to our policy and advocacy work, and our community engagement work. But we're going to dive deeper with data today. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Paula.
All right, just a little bit of a review about what our Data Cornerstone is all about. And we're going to learn a lot today from Michelle Riordan-Nold as she talks us through a little bit about data literacy. But data is both quantitative and qualitative. And while it's really easy to crunch numbers and come up with numerical percentages or probabilities, qualitative data is really just as important. So what do we do with data? We collect it, we clean it and shape it, because as we know, data is not always ready to go. It needs some tender, loving care to make it work. We link it to other data so that we can say, there's a combination of stories to be told, not just about, say, academics, but also about demographics and also about neighborhoods. We analyze the data for insight to find out what is it telling us, what are we learning from this, and what are some trends. We visualize it for clarity so that you can see what the data is telling us and put it in a format that's easy to understand and shows very clearly what is happening. We report on it to the community so that everybody knows that what the indicators are, how we're looking at the data, how we're reading it, and what it means to them. We act on it so that we can enable change. If we see things that require our attention, we want to do something about it. And we also want to enable the community to use it for action. So if these numbers, these indicators, this data has meaning to you for your work, for your organization, for your agency, then we hope that you can use this data to help you do your job better. And always remember that behind every data point is a child. Back to you, Jesse.
I think we're going to turn it over to Michelle now. So we're super excited to welcome Michelle from the CTData Collaborative to give us a workshop. And just afterwards, what we will do is we will go then into individual breakout groups that you can pick based on one of our initiatives, from social emotional health to college and workforce readiness to prenatal to grade 3. And then we will dive deeper with Norwalk specific data and start asking questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Michelle. Thanks.
Hey, thank you, Jesse. So happy to be here early on a Tuesday morning and talking about data, my favorite subject, and hopefully you all will love it too as we go through the workshop. So can you guys see my screen okay? Yep, okay, great. All right, so today, let's see. Today I'm going to provide an overview of CTData, about us, our mission and services. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, I'll give you some examples of our work, and then we'll dive into some fundamentals and principles for data projects and how we at CTData approach our work. So first, I'd like to start with our mission and what we're all about. So striving for informed decision-making across Connecticut, we empower an ecosystem of data users by democratizing access to public data and building data literacy skills. So how does that translate into what we actually do? So we provide all different kinds of services at CTData. We hold data workshops. We build custom data literacy training. We help with data analysis and visualization. We have a helpline. We have a new service that's called Data Strategic Planning, where we help organizations, nonprofits, take and harness their data, have agency over their data. So really look at their activities and outcomes and view data as a strategic asset and make it a strategic asset within the organization. We have special projects and build technical tools to display data. And then we also have an initiative called the Hartford Data Collaborative, which is to build an integrated data system within Hartford. Very similar to Norwalk ACTS and what you all are doing. So just a few examples of our CTData Academy work. These are our data literacy workshops that we hold. And if you're interested, you can find the workshops on our website to sign up for them. They're all virtual right now. At some point, we will go back to in person, but right now they're virtual, so accessible to everyone in Norwalk. So let me jump into a few examples of our work and where you all could find data on Norwalk. So one of our most popular products that we make in conjunction with Advanced CT, formerly Connecticut Economic Resource Center, are the town profiles. And the town profiles provide information on topics like economy, demographics, housing, education, labor force, municipal fiscal, and commuting. And you can find those on profiles.ctdata.org, and there's one on Norwalk as well. We also have our housing profiles, which we have both a PDF that you can print out. So again, you could select Norwalk and look at Norwalk's PDF version, or there's online, there's interactive visualizations. And this is the screenshot of the website. And if you scroll down, you could see some of the different visualizations. Another product that we have, which again would highlight Norwalk data, is our Women and Girls Data Platform. So here we have, you can, choose your geography, and Norwalk is one of the cities that we highlight, and then choose your topic. And all the data will be disaggregated by gender. So it's specific for women and girls, and that's built in conjunction with the Women Collective and Aurora Foundation for Women and Girls. So, and again, it has interactive charts, you choose a topic, etc. One of our more recent projects, which we released at the beginning of February, is a project we called Exposing Connecticut's Eviction Crisis. And what this tool enables you to do is it enables you to, again, customize your view so you can choose your geography that you want to look at. So you could look at the town of Norwalk, or you could look at census tracts within Norwalk, and you can see, choose what you want to count. So if you want to count evictions or filings, you can look at that, and the data are downloadable, and the website's down there at the bottom as well. We also are the state data center, Census State Data Center. Every state has a designated Census State Data Center. And so we serve as the liaison between the public and the Census Bureau. So we help people find and use census data. So this product here that we're showing is the American Community Survey data, which is the product of the Census Bureau where you can get town level information, even census tract data. And the new release is coming of ACS data is coming out Thursday. So on Thursday, you can go to acs2020.ctdata.org and see the latest data. And so what we provide in this tool, we provide some of the top data sets that we get asked about. For example, median household income, population counts, population by age, educational attainment, health insurance, and a bunch of different poverty status. So commonly accessed census data data sets. But as the State Data Center, we also are willing to help you find census data. So, reach out if you have any questions about it. And the next slide is just going to show you a little bit more of the census tool. So it provides a map. You can select the data set, and then you can see the information in a table. So in summary, if you're looking for data on Norwalk, there's lots of different resources. We also have a bunch of data sets that we provide town level data that's in our data by topic. But we have the town profiles, the housing profiles, women and girls data platform, eviction data, the American Community Survey data, data by topic, and then you can always email our helpline, info@ctdata.org. So with that, I'm going to jump into now that you know where all the resources that we provide for Norwalk data, jump into a little bit about fundamentals and principles of data work. So in our mission, our mission says we help build data literacy skills. But what does that really mean? I mean, we talk a lot about it at CTData. And so I'm going to go through a definition just so we're all on the same page of what I mean when I say data literacy. So data literacy is the ability to systematically and ethically ask and answer real world questions with data. So this includes collecting and finding data, being a critical consumer of data, and analyzing and applying data. So what are data, right? So we all know data are facts, stats, pieces of information collected together for analysis or reference. They're things we collect and then get converted into data. It can be numbers, it can be words, right? We often forget sometimes that our case session notes can be turned into data. So really, and Paula alluded to this, is both qualitative and quantitative. And as Paula said, what's most important is that in a lot of the work that we all do and that you all do, the data are people, right? So when we're talking about numbers, it's really people behind the numbers. So it requires that we come to this work as humans with interpersonal skills, emotional talents, and empathy too. So approaching data with humility and respect, because we know that the numbers that we're putting in a report often are represented people behind those numbers. So, and a few principles that we hold here at CTData when we work with data. We want to be able to promote public trust in our handling of data and provide high quality, inclusive, and trusted statistics. So you all are a data person, and we encourage, principled data literacy to ethically serve your community and tell your data story with confidence. So data principles empower data users right from the start. By declaring that we are data people, we take power in our hands and put ourselves in a better position to learn from data to help improve the lives of the people we serve. And remember that data are not neutral, right? There's humans involved in all points of the data lifecycle, which we'll go through in a little bit. So what's important is that every, and here's a quote that I love, every data set involving people has those who collect and those who make up the collected. It's an imperative to remember that on both sides, we have human beings, right? So it's not always, our work is not always imperfect, and being able to recognize and be critical consumers of data is really important. Another principle that we talk about at CTData is just being ethical stewards of data. So ethically collecting it and ethically analyzing it and reporting on it. So I would normally open it up, but we have quite a few people. So curious, just think to yourself, what do you think of when you hear data ethics, and maybe something you can talk about in your breakout groups. But I think of I think of being a quality, good steward of data, right? And then also, we have examples of when our data is not, being, the companies are not being good stewards of data, like when there's a breach, for example, with Equifax or with Facebook. And these really do impact people and also impact trust. So as data intermediaries, like Norwalk ACTS, like CTData, we have to really be ethical and responsible when we're dealing with data to maintain trust. So what does that mean? It's important to have informed consent and confidentiality, and also data sharing agreements. So oftentimes, if you're serving clients, you would have an informed consent with your client so that you are telling them exactly how their information is going to be used if they provide that data to you. As a data intermediary like Norwalk ACTS, they would have data sharing agreements on how they are going to use, for example, with the Norwalk Public Schools, which I believe they do have. So they're going to have written out exactly how they're going to use the data, how they're going to report on the data. So those are really important in terms of ethical uses of data and providing trustworthiness. So clicking through the 3 items that I talked about: confidentiality, informed consent, data sharing, and trustworthiness. Now that we covered just some of the fundamentals and the principles that are important when working with data, I want to talk a little bit about how we approach our data projects. And I'm going to walk through the example, our Exposing Connecticut's Eviction Crisis, as to show you how when we approach a data project, just walking through the life cycle of data. So here's the life cycle. And all the different steps. And Paula, you gave a nice intro to the data lifecycle here. So planning, data collection, data access, possibly using algorithms or statistical tools, data analysis, and then reporting and disseminating. So I'm going to start off with the planning stage. The first step really in the planning is asking questions and seeking the answers that you're trying to answer. So this is really fundamental, right? As an organization, the influence you're trying to make in the social sector can be turned into questions that you want to influence, which drives the data collection. So this piece of data literacy is really about efficacy, empowerment, and curiosity. When we did our, right, so we strive for our programs to be more data informed. So notably is our data is only good as the questions we ask. Sometimes when we get data, we're very curious and we want to dive in and start analyzing it. But we really encourage people to first start with the questions. So as your guide, so you know where you're going. And there's different formats to questions, right? There could be interviews, focus groups, which would provide qualitative data, or you can have administrative data or survey data, which would also be qualitative as well. When we did the eviction work, these were the questions that we tried to answer. So we wanted to know who is being evicted. Are there differences among subpopulations? Where are the evictions happening in the state? What was the impact of the moratorium? What are the trends post-moratorium? And does having legal counsel change the outcomes? So the eviction work is very much project-based work, but for those of you who are working and serving individuals in the Norwalk community, imagine your questions might have something to do with, are we making a difference, right? Is the engagement improving? Is chronic absenteeism decreasing with engagement in our program? So questions like that. So next, after you have your questions and where you want to, your North Star and head towards, you want to think about data collection. And I'm also going to talk about both collection and access simultaneously. So what is data definition for data collection? Systematic and ethical data collection asks and answers the right questions, creates the conditions for effective decision-making, robust questions, and more accurate data dissemination and reporting. So if we aren't systematic, we might end up drawing conclusions that are not accurate and making decisions that aren't actually helpful. So in our case, when we were looking at the eviction data, we accessed court records. So this was a project with CT Fair Housing Center as well, and they purchased the court record data. And so we had that data. We also had Social Security birth record information. I'll go into why we use that data as well. And then we also had census data. Now, all of these sources that we accessed are secondary public data sources. Some of you might be collecting primary data if you're doing surveys, if you're doing intake forms, case notes, focus groups. But in our case, it was all secondary public data. And that's something that you can find on CTData's website, which I did show you prior to all the different secondary data sources where you can access Norwalk data. But when you know where to find the data, the next step is critiquing and interpreting it. So where does it come from? What is it trying to say? And is it relevant to your work? You always want to kind of just think about the data quality. As I talked about before, humans are involved in every step of the way. So there's always the possibility of biases being introduced or human error, in whatever way. So, really trying to understand the quality is important. How was the data collected? Who was it collected from? If it's, survey data, are there margins of error that you need to take into account? Is the sample size sufficient to be representative of the population? Is the source trustworthy? Is it primary source, secondary source? These are all important questions to think through and being a critical consumer. And then, of course, comes the fun part, the cleaning and the data processing. So, in the data set, do you have missing values, partial and complete values? Are they systematically missing, or is it at random? Because you're going to handle that differently. Are there errors, duplicative values? So these are all things to think through. And just to give you a concrete example, when we were working with our eviction data, there was a lot of cleaning and processing that had to be done for the court records. So in the court records, we have, there are quite a few defendants with the names of Jane and John Doe. So when they file eviction, if they don't exactly know the name, they'll just put it down as Jane and John Doe. So we had to figure out a way to handle those missing names. The addresses were quite, difficult to, we had to standardize them. And in order, because we wanted to geocode all the evictions, so being able to place it on a map, and then we had to create a new variable to flag access to counsel, because in the court records data set doesn't have a column that says person had access to counsel. We had to use some of the codes that they have and create a new variable. So these are some of the cleaning things that we had to do with the data to make it actually usable. And another step, the next step in the life cycle is the use of algorithms or statistical tools. So, I mean, this, not all analyses or not all data work that you're probably doing or projects would require, statistical tools or algorithms, but in the case of the eviction work that we did have to do a little bit. We had to enrich the data. So in the public record, it doesn't have the male, female, doesn't identify whether a defendant is male or female. So we had to, in order to figure out who is being evicted, we had to use a methodology where we assigned the probability of male, female to each case. And what we did is we linked the data, the court record data, with about 60 years of Social Security Administration birth record data by name. So the Social Security Administration collects all the names and assign, and the assigned male, female at birth is recorded in the Social Security Administration database. So that is how we linked up and determined who is being evicted in Connecticut. We also wanted to look at the race and ethnicity of folks being evicted in Connecticut. So in order to do that, we had to use Sergio's implementation of the Bayesian improved surname geocoding model. So basically what we had to do is we linked with census data, the court record data, to identify and create a probability of race ethnicity based on where the eviction census tract was occurring. So those are just some examples of the statistical work and enriching the data that we do at CTData when the data itself doesn't have the answers to the questions that we want. So in this case, it was who is being evicted. Based on the court record data, we couldn't just answer that. We had to link it up with other data. So next in the life cycle is actually the analysis. And what do I mean by that? So I mean, really trying to make meaning of the data. And so when we put all these pieces together, we can start trying to make sense of what we're looking at and talking about the data. And so just, very simply, what is data analysis? It's trying to figure out how many, it's trying to figure out how different is something that you're looking at and how similar. So, and going back to the questions that you want, the big questions that you start out with is, how should we change our program or strategy? How, what benefits are there to the program that we're providing, the service that we're providing? Are there unintended negative outcomes from our service or program? Are we having an impact? Are we having the influence or making the difference that we think we are, right? And so those questions really drive your data analysis. So for us, in evictions, thinking about how many, right? Over the past 5 years, 2017 to 2021, there were 75,429 eviction cases filed by landlords. Were there any differences? Yes, more females were evicted than males, and that was true for all years that we looked at. There were differences. Black and Hispanic females were disproportionately faced evictions. And then the question of access to counsel. 80% of landlords had access to counsel on average, and 7% of renters had access to counsel on average, which meant that landlords were 11 times more likely to have representation. And finally, the outcomes were different for those who had access to counsel. So we're 89% more likely to have a removal order issued if you did not have a lawyer. So the next step in the life cycle is reporting and dissemination. So this is the final stage. So I'm not gonna go through all of reporting or taking action on data. I'm gonna leave you with just a few tidbits of stuff to think about in your work. A large part of CTData that we do is thinking about how to communicate through data visualization. So I'm going to share a few of those principles. If you're interested, we do have workshops in data storytelling and data visualization, which go more in depth into the fun part, which is the reporting out and then figuring out how to take action. So something that we've been talking a lot about, and I'm sure you all have in your work, is thinking about how do we reframe what our work, particularly data work. So, I think a lot of our work is deficit framed, right? Defining people by their problems. And so we at CTData, and I know all of you are probably trying to think of this too, is how do we present our work so it's in an asset frame, right? And defining people by their contributions and aspirations. So when we talk about at risk and disadvantage, what we're doing is obscuring the problem, right? If you say research, say research suggests poverty and racism place students at risk, now we know the problem, right? And we can address it. So it allows you to view the individual students separate and apart from the particular risk. We had, last year, we had a conference and we had John Schwabish come speak to us. He called it Do No Harm, and you can access it on our website. The link will be in the PowerPoint. And so he talked about how we can rethink the way we do data visualization. And he had some really interesting insights to share. One is to demonstrate empathy. And so when sharing data visualizations, think about people first language. So instead of people with disabilities as opposed to disabled people, really putting people first, right? And the one challenge is language is always changing, but it's really important to be aware of it. And then to think about your icons, your colors, your order, and again, the language that you use. So here's an example. We had, when thinking about ordering, we had a partner of ours show us this graph. But this is not, I would not recommend this, right? Why are we putting white first, then Black, then Asian, American Indian? Like really thinking about how we're presenting the data and being intentional about it. So this is a better way. So here we are ordering highest to lowest. So in thinking about how you're presenting, does your study focus on a particular community? If it does, that group should be presented first. Is there a particular argument, a story you're trying to tell? If so, the order of the presentation of results should reflect the argument, right? Or sort as we did here by quantitative relationship, alphabetically, population size, sample size. So those are just a few examples. And then finally, just in thinking about the data work, shifting how you frame the data also changes how you solve the problem. So hopefully in closing, you can think about that as you all break out into your groups and look at the data that will be shared and thinking about what you can do with it. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Michelle. That was fantastic. You did that so well, and I hope that everybody could relate to all of the different steps in the process and the considerations. And you know, what goes on behind the curtains, because I think that that's sometimes we make it look easy, but in fact it's very challenging, you know, not only doing the data cleanup and linking and all of those, you know, mechanical and technical steps, but how do we present it, and how do we present it with empathy, and to do it in such a way that it does no harm. I think that workshop, for anybody that has any interest in data, I would definitely recommend that you watch the recording of that workshop, because it'll change your thinking. And it kind of blows your mind too, because it makes you realize, you know, that simple question is, if I was one of these data points, would I be offended? You know, that kind of made me sit up and take notice a little bit more. So empathy is a huge part of this. You know, we think of data as being very technical and clear and fact-based, but you know, it's so much more than that. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you for having me.
Are there any other questions? Comments? How can we access the Do No Harm workshop?
Michelle just added
Okay.
the link, Nancy, in the chat.
Yep, and there's a video embedded in the blog post that you can watch.
And we can add it, Emily, to our, when we send out our notes from this, we can add it to. MJ has a question.
Good question. Regarding qualitative versus quantitative data, it's always challenging, especially in our work. For example, I'm manager of community engagement. So, you know, we do a lot of qualitative self-assessments and things like that. And just would love to hear your feedback of what the challenges, the strengths of each different types, quantitative versus qualitative.
And how to collect, how do we do a better job of collecting the qualitative?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, you know, the benefits of qualitative data is that you can ask the questions, right? So you have, you know, agency over what gets asked. I mean, it is tricky. Designing surveys is a science, right? Not an art. So it can be, you know, tricky to get exactly the information that you are looking for, but you also do have control over it, where a lot of times quantitative data, it doesn't tell us the whole story, right? And I think it's really important that you combine both. And that's what we encourage, is to think about both, adding the quantitative and the qualitative, because, you know, the quantitative is going to give you the counts, you know, the test results, the, you know, but it's not going to tell you, you know, when you're looking at chronic absenteeism rates, it's not going to tell you, well, was this child suffering from asthma and therefore wasn't in school for a health reason, right? So whereas that's where, you know, the qualitative data and or is going to, you know, sort of help fill in the gaps. So I think, you know, and just in terms of, yeah, both are really important, and they both have a place in terms of telling the story.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things we want to stress too is how important linking different data sets is, because again, if you're just collecting, for instance, absenteeism, you know, in a perfect world, it's a yes, no. But in the real world, there are so many other factors that might contribute to that absenteeism. And it could be, there was a, I wish I could remember the exact story, but there's so many little anecdotal stories about how when you're connecting some supporting data or some supporting information about that particular indicator, you find out things that might just make you scratch your head, because I never considered, whether it be weather, whether it be transportation, you know, why are more children not having access to summer programming? Well, we all pretty much know that transportation is a big issue, but you know, beyond that, is it a neighborhood issue? Is it a, you know, who can help solve that? Is it the transit authority that needs to help us out? You know, who are the people that have some levers that could change the outcomes that we might not be considering? So You know, the data is, we have lots and lots of data, but turning that into really actionable information is the challenge, of course. But again, it's also about, you know, not just the numbers, the facts and figures. It's about people. I don't see any other hands up or any other questions in the chat. So I'd like to thank you, Michelle, for coming and presenting us with such rich information. You did that so much better than I could. So hopefully everybody's gotten a little bit more educated on the data cycle and seen a little bit more of what goes on behind the curtain. So.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. So we are going to now kind of enter our own phase of the Norwalk data lifecycle and go into breakout groups based on your choice. By the way, can everyone hear me okay this time, or am I still?
You're good.
All right. So before we go into breakout groups, just kind of want to review some norms, and especially with the asset framing lens that Michelle kind of offered at the end. Just think about that and keep that in mind. So listen and be open and different to perspectives and experiences, show respect and suspend judgment. Disagreement is an opportunity to expand our perspectives. Check your assumptions and assume positive intent. Be purposeful to the point, and step up and step back. And I think we've all been in this Zoom world for a very long time now. I'm really just going to ask all of you to engage in the next 45 minutes. We're going to be asking questions about data. And these questions that you asked today are going to help us narrow our focus in these different areas as part of Norwalk ACTS Strategic Planning. So this is a really critical session for us to collect data from you about our data and how to get better and stronger in that area. So we'll have 3 breakout groups, and there'll be some backbone staff in each one and a facilitator. We'll have one for prenatal grade 3, one for social emotional health, and one for college and workforce readiness. We'll start off with some introductions. There'll be a short data presentation around Norwalk data points, and then we'll spend the bulk of the time reflecting and discussing the data. So when we go into these breakout groups, which I'm about to launch in a moment, you will be able to select one. This little window will pop up once you click the breakout rooms, and you will click join to the one that you want to pick. If you're having issues with that, just hang on for a moment. You can tell us which one you want to go to, and then we will assign you to that one. So this will be a little bit of a process for the moment, but I'm going to open it up and then we're going to dive in. All right, the rooms are all open, so you can now click breakout groups, find the one you want to join, and click join.
I can't get into my room.
Where are you trying to go, Annalena?
Social and emotional.
I'll send you there.
Thank you.
Brandon, where are you going?
I think I'll go to social emotional health.
That was amazing. I had the benefit of bouncing around to the 3 different groups, and it was hard to leave and go to another one because I didn't want to leave the conversations that were happening. So super grateful for Jesse and Paula and Margaret and Danique for leading everyone through those 3 breakouts. Danique, I don't see you on my
Yep, I'm
screen. You're somewhere.
I'm
Okay.
here. I'm here.
So I think you're going to lead us through just a little bit of a debrief.
Yeah, so let's hear a little bit from each of the groups. So I don't know who will be representing the others. I don't know if it might be easier. Ana Melina, do you want to talk a little bit about social emotional?
Yeah, I can
What
just
we
kick it off. Hi, everyone. So our group, we touched on the social emotional health, and we had our awesome presentation by Margaret and positive direction on our youth data points. And a lot of the discussion was really processing and understanding, you know, where our kids are at the moment. We had a couple of folks join specifically our group because they're working in other regions and curious about what our data says and what we are doing on our end to see what they, you know, how we can collaborate and support them on their end. And they're pretty much seeing the same trends within our youth. Some parents had questions about what the district or community is doing. And I think the end to that point is how, as a community, we have to continue to come together on a community level, on a grassroots level outside of the school, knowing that our schools and everyone is you know, trying the best that they can to address this. But really, what we talked about was really how do we engage our parents out of school? How do we educate and create these spaces for our youth to support their other youth. Another topic when it came to children and students and their suicide is students and youth sometimes confide and feel more comfortable confiding in their friends, confiding in their close ones instead of a teacher or a social worker or a counselor. And so how can we continue to create these peer-to-peer mentoring opportunities for our children to become their own leaders and be able to advocate for those who cannot. And again, this data here highlights this dramatic need. And hopefully with this, we can continue to share and really use this as a resource for everyone to help guide each other's work.
Ana Melina.
And
You got it all? You got it all, my friend?
Got it all.
So thank you. So hopefully that gave you all a little bit of a glimpse of really what we talked about in SEH. I think the other thing to really highlight, and I'm sure that it's something that was brought up in the other groups, is really talking about, you know, every gap is an opportunity. And obviously there's some definite needs, need for attentions out there, but really being able to have this conversation with all of you this morning has been beneficial to really be able to identify both what the gaps are, but then also what other opportunities there are ahead of us to be able to do this as a community. Anyone for workforce development? Jesse, are you doing it?
Jesse, we can't hear you. It's always on these big times that we have these technical difficulties.
Always.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So we looked at a very big data point, and I'll just kind of share the highlights of it. But we talked about the 4 to 6 year college persistence and graduation rate for the class of 2015 for Norwalk Public School students. So when those students graduated high school in 2015, 73% of them enrolled in college, and 27% did not enroll into a 2 or 4 year degree program. And 6 years later, which is the data that just from last year's 2021 graduation year, about half of those students ultimately graduated college in 6 years. About 30% of those students went to college but dropped out. And then about 20% of those students never attended college. And so we talked about what questions this data had us left wondering. There were so many questions about, you know, what happens to the students that are dropping out or never pursued a 2 or 4 year degree? Where are they in terms of employment, in terms of what types of jobs do they have? What pathways are they in? What are their wages and salaries? What is the difference between salary of a student that did go to college versus the salary of a student that did not go to a 2 or 4 year degree program, and just wanting to learn so much more about what type of financial aid supports, and then how can we disaggregate this data and learn more about, you know, what institution versus NCC or a CSCU system, and just learning more about all of that. So there were some really great points, and there's some really strong stories shared about the lack of pathways or a college going culture, or supports for students who are filling out the FAFSA. So I think those are the highlights, but I want to see if I missed anything or any other wonderings around the college persistence and graduation data that we looked at. Barbara, did I catch you at all? Okay, all right. Well, those are the highlights of the data we talked about.
That sounds awesome.
Jesse, can you put a link to the best place to get the data in the chat?
Yeah, we'll send a follow-up. Our website's a little bit under construction right now, so I only have like the Google slide version, but we'll send a follow-up deck that will include these smaller subset decks around the data points so you can see the other pieces.
And then last but not least, I don't know if it's Paula or someone else from the group. Paula, if you wanted to highlight what you all talked about with ASQ and prenatal, the third.
Yeah, we talked a lot about the ASQ data that we've collected and the longitudinal data showing, you know, the difference between first ASQ and the last ASQ. And then we broke it down a little bit more about the differences between how a parent would score an ASQ and how a teacher or provider would score it. And we talked a lot about equity and, you know, the differences in, you know, what a teacher is looking for and how a teacher would answer the question versus how a parent is. And, you know, it's normal to think about a parent as, you know, thinking that, oh yeah, my child can do all of this. Or just to be a little bit more biased in scoring, whereas a teacher might be looking at, you know, their experience in the classroom and looking at that child in comparison to the rest of the classroom. And that's where, you know, a pretty salient point came up, is that a parent is looking at their one child and doing scoring on their one child without the benefit of, you know, comparison with other children in their sphere. So, you know, there's a lot of work to do to try to understand that and maybe change that. And a lot of that has to do with engagement of parents and helping them understand why we do the ASQ and giving them the feedback of the results and intervention strategies and techniques for building their child's developmental skills. And then we also talked about the comparison between ASQ results and KEI results. And the KEI is done in the kindergarten classroom by the teacher in the fall of kindergarten year. And the trends are similar between the subgroups of children based on their preschool experience, but there's also still that gap that exists between, you know, well, this is a gap between the ASQ results done by parents and the KEI results done by teachers, even though they're different, you know, they're not the same screen. All right, the KEI is a little more academic, whereas ASQ is obviously more developmental, social, emotional. So, you know, a lot of questions come up about equity, about understanding, about engagement with parents and making them partners in this process from an early age. A lot of really good discussion. People brought up a lot of good points that talk about the qualitative data as opposed to just the quantitative. Quantitative is, we've got that, we measure it, we show it, we report on it, but really in order to change some of the outcomes, we really need to work on some of those qualitative issues. Did I leave anything out, team? Anybody have anything to add?
No, you did a great job, Paula.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, so I think that I'm sure that it's probably fair to say that within all three of the breakout groups, at some point of your conversation, you talked about, well, then what's next? So let's talk about what our next steps are. Alluded to this within the comments ahead of our breakout groups, but we are in strategic plan. We are in our own strategic planning process, and we're really looking to narrow our focus within our initiative outcomes to really be able to set 3-year goals. So thank you all for your participation during both the breakout groups as well as our larger presentation by the Connecticut Data Collaborative. And we will be collecting the notes, which are comprised of all of your data and your both qualitative and quantitative responses to our discussion prompts from today's session, and using that to really continue to inform our process of narrowing down our focus. So really just want to highlight that and in deep appreciation. So I think to kind of close us out, I'm going to pass this back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Danique. Thanks to everybody. This was really so wonderful. Appreciate all the good discussion. As Danique said, we are in strategic planning and we're looking at, kind of twofold outcome areas. One is how we build capacity of the broader membership of Norwalk ACTS to do things like we did today, use data, as well as our other cornerstones of focusing on race equity, engaging our community, and advancing, good public policy. But we're also looking at kind of what are our larger North Star outcomes within each of the 3 areas that we broke into groups to talk about today. We really put a stake in the ground on some community-wide metrics that we want to really move the needle on, and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable for those. So this was great feedback for that process, and you all know who have been in other spaces too, in the IT and implementation team board and others, that we're having lots of conversations around this. Just in the immediate next steps, you have an opportunity, while it's not official, and I know we throw around the word qualitative a lot, and Sarah's on here probably cringing sometimes when we say, it's not official qualitative research, but our youth town halls are an opportunity to engage and hear kind of that anecdotal evidence from students about the lived experience that they have on many of these issues. The SEH group talked about the LGBTQ plus population. I think one of the most powerful ones we had within the last year was the one where students talked about their experience from members of that community. So we really encourage, if you've been following the news around the open choice program between Darien and Norwalk, we are getting Darien and Norwalk students to talk to one another about race relations tomorrow night, and urge you to please listen in, share this. This is on social media and others, and encourage your colleagues, your children, whomever, to join that conversation. So that is here up on the screen. It was also went out a couple times in our newsletters. And then, drum roll please, not to be overly optimistic, but we do hope to be in person in June for our next convening, which is our annual. I feel like now I'm going to be cursed and struck by, lightning or something because I said it. But please, no more variants, and that we can get together safely on June 15th. Please cross-check that date, make sure that's right?
I don't know if that's right. Are we doing it on a Tuesday? Because the Tuesday is June 14th.
Oh gosh, see, there we go. Thank you, MJ. It is a Tuesday, so I don't know how we got that wrong. I may have messed that up. I apologize. It is June 14th, so take the 10 seconds after we hang up to put it in your calendars right now. We understand if calendar invites don't come, sometimes we forget. So even though we blanket these dates all over the place, if you're not putting it in your calendars, you may forget. So please go right now, June 14th, 9 to 11. We are hoping to be back live at Stepping Stones and in person. So more to come on that. But I think that's all on my end. Very grateful to all of you and the work you do every day. So enjoy the spring weather and stay healthy and safe.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Have a nice one. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Karina.
Hey, I don't know who's recording. I can't stop the recording. You are?